Hey everyone, welcome back to Crypto Cash. Thank you so much again for joining me here. Hope you're having a fantastic day regardless of the red market. This is very standard stuff though, try not to overthink it. We'll talk more about that. We're going to discuss some specific chart patterns on Ethereum and why this may be a coin worth taking a long on. There's currently a whale with a $98 million position, roughly a $4,500 entry. So interesting stuff there to say the least. We're also going to take a look at some specific data here too, kind of identifying these specific areas of support that are consistent and confluent in a lot of ways with liquidation here, and obviously just some general outliers here to help understand specifically which coins you may or may not want to invest in this weekend. All that and much more. Let's take a closer look. Stick around. All right, folks, before we jump into the backend data here, just going to touch quickly on my social media post here, just give you some perspective that there are some really large positions out there, specifically with Ethereum. So we're not going to be focusing only on Ethereum, of course, but just to kind of give you the foundation before we look into the bullish type of structures that it does have on the charts. We can see a $98 million position opened on Ethereum at $45.50 with a liquidation price at $38.77. So that just kind of gives us perspective. That's a very safe trade. I know it sounds crazy to say, but we're well above a lot of key level supports on Ethereum. And we're going to look at that here in just a moment, just kind of give you some perspective on what that looks like. Ethereum's still very strong. It's in its key level support range. So I do kind of side with the whale there for taking a long position, but obviously we want to be careful, so we'll double check that. Now, take a look here at the back end. First of all, this is just kind of like order blocks or order books, depending on how you want to word it specifically. It tells us where the largest amount of positions are desired for entry. In other words, if we look on the far right-hand side, we can see that there is roughly about 100 million in longs that are wanting to take a long position or get it filled on a bid, basically at 115,000. So that's kind of the next area there of interest, and the secondary entry there, basically above the price, 116,400. So these are just larger positions at those levels. They're typically going to reinforce support and resistance just based on the larger positions that are wanting to get filled in those areas here. We can see the same thing reflected here, 115,000 on the order block and 116.4 is the two highest positions that are looking to get filled here. And the far left-hand side just kind of gives us perspective. There's a lot of Bitcoin being bought in the 115K range. Majority of these are $1 million positions plus. Okay, so those are just getting filled every couple minutes. So it's pretty crazy. Now to touch on patterns here, just give you some perspective here. This is that's the hourly. You can kind of see a triangle pattern there, and we kind of zoom in a little bit here for Ethereum. There is a double bottom as well forming. So I think there's a distinct chance we do pivot and bounce off this $4,500 range. So I've been leaning more towards an entry at $4,500 for Ethereum. So this may be a good consideration. We'll double check that before we jump into the charts, right? Or jump into a trade rather. We want to dive into the charts first. Now to quickly note here as well, when it comes to liquidation and just kind of back-end data, let's look at the daily time frame here for Bitcoin, just kind of give us perspective. In the last 24 hours, we see the largest amount of liquidation at roughly 118K, and then a lot between 115 and 114.5. Okay, so those are just kind of local longs and shorts that could get hit here hard. We can see we're getting closer to this long range. So in other words, there's a lot of longs that could get swept at 114.5, and then of course 114, and then down as low as roughly 113. So the range of 113 to 114.5 is highly contested. There's a lot of people feeling confident in taking long positions with liquidation events there, feeling like they're not going to get stopped out. So just note that could be a distinct possibility here for us. And when we take a look at liquidation, I like to kind of just get perspective on the market and where it's at. And generally speaking, you'll see like significant, influx in different directions, and that increases the likelihood of the price pivoting or bouncing. In other words, for Ethereum, for example, there's like a 7, almost 6-to-1 ratio of shorts versus longs. So there's way more longs getting liquidated than shorts, implying we're reaching a tentative bottom. Now, that doesn't mean much at all. It's just still kind of like the concept here is that with liquidation, as you kind of dive into liquidation consistently, you'll start noting that there's a lot of people that, every time you break a trend line, for example, the price should continue going down, but it goes the opposite direction because there's so much liquidation the other way. Okay, and I can show you more so on the charts what I mean by that. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you'll probably know that manipulation is a very standard, consistent thing in trading. And with that being such a large amount of liquidation to the downside for Ethereum, it emphasizes the more propensity for it to bounce and continue higher up here. Okay, so that's just the last 24-hour liquidations. We take a look here at Bitcoin. somewhere in the range of about a 4-to-1 ratio. So 4 or 5-to-1 ratio, somewhere in there. And it's basically letting us know that obviously we're starting to see some slowing pressure. This is a very standard profit taking stuff. Okay. So once more, just kind of normalizing it for you a little bit there so you understand that we're not in dire straits because we see a little bit of a pullback. It's a Friday. We had a profitable week. It makes total sense for the price to pull back leading into the weekend. So that kind of begs the question, are we going to see a green or a red weekend? A lot of times when you see profit taken on Fridays, the weekend can kind of go flat. So I'm hoping we see something like that, honestly, so we can prepare for early next week, some good positions. Fear and greed index is in neutral. We've seen that for a while. We've known that. That's pretty good. Honestly, just a very good place to be right now, kind of that transition. We can also see altcoin season index is just, it's firing on all cylinders. So even though we're seeing a pullback here today, there's still not a lot of, the top 100 is still outperforming Bitcoin for the most part. So this kind of what leads into altcoin season index being high. We can still see the 1.7 plus trillion dollar market cap for altcoins. So if that continues to maintain in the 1.7 or higher, we're probably going to be going further up here in the relative near future. But once more, altcoins, even though they did pull back somewhat significant today, they're starting to bottom out already, and these are very good signs here. So let's take a look here without further ado. Take a look at the Bitcoin, kind of get some perspective on, well, liquidation areas, etc. Just kind of give us some understanding of where we're at now. These are longs and shorts, green and red, of course, for both medium and high leverage. This is a daily time frame, so just give us some perspective. There's that $114,500 mark in the center, and then we got 111.5. So we got a $3,000 range for Bitcoin that could essentially come down as low as 111 based solely on liquidation here on the macro. So that's kind of what we're looking at there on the daily. But if we zoom into the 4-hour time frame, we can see once more it's kind of reinforced, a little easier to see. There are some shorts at 118.5 and 118 even, but for the most part, we're seeing a lot more longs that have potential to get swept. But more confidence too, because the more longs you see in the market, the more likelihood of the price going higher, based on the simple fact that we could very well see that liquidation long delta shift its momentum or maintain above that zero level, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, that equilibrium. Now, when we look at longs versus shorts, this is kind of just giving us perspective. We have more longs than shorts in the market right now. So the average top trader is taking a long right now as the price continues to pull back. So as you start to see this pivot and bounce, so to speak, the more likelihood of the price going to hold and sustain, because market makers, larger position, they usually know something more than we do, right? Now, some of them are idiots, of course. There's a few outliers, but generally speaking, the bigger the position, the more likelihood of the price action going in that direction. So we're starting to see more buying pressure as the price comes into that 115K range for Bitcoin. Now we can see whale traders aren't super active here. Of course, these are really large positions, like the $1 million plus positions. But generally speaking, we can see a lot of institutional traders kind of just in this position right now, taking more longs here today. Now, when we look at the overall sentiment here for open interest, this is a 1 month look back, just kind of reinforcing 113,000 is that pretty solid area of support. We also got to understand too, open interest ranges, they have a tendency of working like magnets too. So I'm not surprised to see 113,000 in the relative near future. Now, do I want to short into that right now? Possibly. We're going to double check and see if there's any divergences. I wanted to get into a short at 118.5 to 119K range. Price turned around at 118. So kind of missed that boat on what Solana. I was wanting to short, what was it? Solana, SUI, and Bitcoin. Those are the ones I was considering shorting. And obviously missed those opportunities, but you don't want to FOMO into something like that too, right? So always better to be on the safer side of things. What I'm getting at here is we got a 118K range for resistance, and then 114 and 113 respectively for potential support areas based on open interest. But once more, those levels can oftentimes be retested because there is interest in those levels. Those are open positions or unfilled positions in a lot of ways. All that being said, when we look at Bitcoin, we can recognize liquidation long delta is still on the green side of things. That's good. Ultimately, a positive sign, reinforcing support in 115K range. Now, when we look at liquidation, there's obviously a ton of liquidation between 118 and 119. That's that area I was hoping to see swept first before shorting. And if we look here, of course, we can zoom in a little bit. We can see 112 to 114-ish. kind of sparse and sporadic, but there's a lot of liquidation kind of spread out in those ranges. So there's not like one mega concentration here, but there is definitely a lot of volume in that lower 112 to 114 range. So once more, that kind of emphasizes the fact that 113 is still a possibility for us. Now, in order to see that, oftentimes we want to look for lower lows and lower highs, and we still haven't essentially established that yet. We saw this 115.7 mark hold very strong here locally, so there's decent propensity we still continue further up here. But this could very well be the calm before the storm, so be mindful. Market makers are pretty mischievous here, and if we look at the daily time frame, well, it's been a semi-profitable week. We're still fairly well ranging between 115 and 117 or 118. We can see a pretty distinct resistance range here for us at 117. If we just kind of take the candlestick closures there, roughly 117.1 is that area of resistance here locally based on daily candlestick closures for Bitcoin. So closing above 117 would give us some strength, kind of letting us know that the bulls can reclaim that. Now, what we're not looking for today is a bearish engulfing candle, which would imply the last 24 hours is consuming the previous 24 hours, basically emphasizing the fact that the bears are in control. So what we're looking for is a closure above 116.5 today to give us that confirmation that we're not going to be going down much further. Okay, because we can close above that level, it kind of shows that the bulls can still maintain this current trading session, this last 24-hour period. So it's kind of what we're looking for, 116.5 or higher as a rule of thumb there for continuation upwards. If we close below that, it may be a consideration for some shorts. All that being said, everything here on the daily time frame is still pretty decent in the overall sense. Once more, a lot of confluence of that 113K range with the previous highs working as new potential low. And then, of course, all the moving averages just above that level. 4-hour time frame, it's probably going to reflect that we're losing some moving averages, which we are. We're now under 50 on the RSI and stochastic swinging down. So a lot of these are bearish signs kind of letting us know that further continuation lower should be expected. So I am thinking just in general, we do see that 113 to 114K range. There's a lot of back-end confirming factors kind of identifying further downside would make sense. So I'd be careful just taking longs on the weekend. I don't love when we see this kind of price action leading into the weekend. It makes me kind of want to stay on the sidelines and kind of sit it out. But once more, I wait to trade more often than the next person, and I can miss a lot of opportunities too. So if you don't want to miss any opportunities, I would say we have a slightly larger statistical favorability of shorts being more favorable at this point. But we truly haven't broken our trend lines yet and or established lower lows and lower highs. So it's still considered an inherent risk to consider a short right now. So that's kind of where we're at there. What are your thoughts? Why don't you comment below before we jump into these next series of altcoins? We'll take a closer look at those right now. Quick heads up to my traders, make sure you take full advantage of this offer here from Bitunix. There's a significant deposit reward bonus as well as a $16,000 individual reward for just trading on the exchange. If you use my link to register in the past, you're automatically eligible. If you use my link to register now, you're eligible for all future trading bonuses and competitions. Check out the links down below for more information. All right, folks, before we jump into the Ethereum chart, I just want to quickly double check some back-end stuff here, mainly just the order blocks here for Ethereum to kind of see where the interest is here. And this is very good to note because then we understand where the price could pivot and bounce if it goes in either direction. Okay, so we do have 4,500 as that upper range. There's about 100 million at 4,500 in interest there for Ethereum. So those are unfilled positions. These are the asks at that level. The bids are at 4,400. Mainly, we got about 75 million at that level, upwards of 4,430. So that emphasizes support in those ranges. That's oftentimes also why you see those areas work as magnets in a lot of ways, because open interest is exactly that. It's interesting levels there or interested levels where people want to try to fill their positions. So just know we could come as low as 4,400 and see a bounce, or possibly a rejection off 4,500 to the upside. Now, let's go ahead and double check the chart pattern here, just kind of give you perspective. There is a double bottom for Ethereum forming on the slightly larger time frames. The 4-hour time frame does reflect a potential bounce for Ethereum. So there's a good sign in a lot of ways, but also can be disadvantageous, and I'll explain more so why here on the charts. Before we do, though, let's look at the back-end liquidation data. On the far right-hand side, I do have open interest. This is kind of the last 7 days worth of open interest. We can see 4,480 and 4,550. So those are two heavy concentrations there. Once more, kind of emphasizing resistance. So hypothetically, a short at 4,550 or 4,500 may be a valid consideration based on the amount of open interest below the price and how the price may pull back to those ranges. We look at liquidation delta, we can recognize that we are tapering off, we're approaching break even. Usually when you see a break even for liquidation delta, it tells us there's a shift in momentum. Obviously the bears are losing or gaining control, the bulls are losing control. It's kind of like a dynamic shift. So oftentimes you see momentum shifts occur that start like this. So that's kind of where we're at there. And once more, we're just below our support level, 4,500 for Ethereum. So that in combination with Bitcoin pulling back, I think there's a decent propensity we may see that $4,400 level retested. On the left-hand side, we got the last 7 days worth of liquidation for Ethereum. We can see 4,350 is that lower, heaviest concentration. Let's go ahead and zoom out just a little bit to the monthly, get a better perspective here for ETH and kind of see what that tells us. We double check here from a macro, we can see 4,200 is that rough estimate there. So once more, there's a lot of confirming factors here, emphasizing further downside for Ethereum, even though there's a lot of bullish type of play out charts here, or more so patterns essentially, letting us know that we could go up. So that's why patterns are not really recommended to trade solely based on the simple fact that they're fallible, right? And the reason why is because most people just kind of focus on that, and the whales are like, "Oh, great, we got a nice bullish pennant pattern. Let's dump it," right? It's unfortunate, but it's just kind of the way that it goes. And I think the backend data speaks a little bit louder than just seeing a wonderful, nice looking chart on the, a pattern on the charts there. Either way, we do have a bullish type of triangle pattern. These do typically break to the upside. Just keep that in mind. Furthermore, too, we're losing 50 on the RSI. We are diverging on the MACD, and stochastic is swinging down with money flow index pulling back. There's nothing there that I like. I don't like to see that. It's a pretty significant divergence, especially with the fact that we ran up for an overextension. We may be channeling ourselves into a type of breakdown. Obviously, it depends on the time frame you look at, but I don't like the daily time frame here. We're also under 50 on the RSI here. Money flow index is remaining high. That's generally a favorable sign, but that's only because we had super significant candles here. So it's one of those false positives that I don't really like to trust. A lot of folks will use market cipher too, and it can give you inaccurate type of trigger signals to take a long when you shouldn't. So at this point, I think a short between 4,500 to 4,550 seems much more appropriate. That in combination with a large market maker trying to take a long at 4,550, there's a good chance we go a bit lower because of those things, right? So those are just my thoughts. I hope that I'm wrong and the price goes straight up for you. I mean, I'm heavy in the $1,500 range for my spot bag on Ethereum, so I don't really care what it does. But on the truthful side here is that while we are overextended to the downside, and there's a decent chance we could pivot and bounce from here with all the liquidation having been swept here locally, there's a solid chance, though, based on everything we looked at so far, that we do see a little bit further downside here for ETH. So those are my thoughts. Why don't you comment below? Let me know what you're thinking too. Just before we take a look at the next altcoin, I want to recommend you consider trading with Bitunix. If you use my link to register down below or have in the past, you'll always be eligible for future trading competitions, but this one is awesome. It's probably the best one I've seen yet, with a full-on $16,000 individual prize pool, as well as a collective prize pool as well for the top 30 traders. Be sure to check out the link down below for more information. Let's take a look here next at Solana. Kind of double check. This was a beast yesterday, and I was hoping to get a short in at about the 255 range. It never quite hit that resistance level. Instead, it pulled back beforehand. So this is a common thing right now in trading, where you do a lot of work, you try to look for good entries, and those entries just pass you by just very small margins. I mean, I was pretty much sleeping when this happened too, so it's not like it really matters. But on the same accord, it's okay to miss opportunities, perfectly normal. So I do want to normalize that for the most part here, and recognize that it's important to not try to FOMO in too much. So all that being said, regardless of those little thingamajigs that I keep like to reiterate and reaffirm in my videos, we want to double check some stuff here. So the last 7 days tells us that we can see open interest at 235. So hypothetically, 235 is the local bottom for Solana. Now, it all depends on a lot of different things here, but that's a good sign in most cases. We saw that open interest area hit. That being said, we take a look here at Solana liquidation delta. It is shifting break even, but hasn't done so yet. In other words, we still have more longs than shorts in the market. That's usually a good sign. The thing that concerns me, though, is you look back the last 7 days, 225 to 230 is like a massive chunk of liquidation. So there's a lot going on there. That's probably about somewhere in the range of about 10 to 15 billion between 230 and 225. So those are areas that I don't like to see below the price when I'm considering a long position. So just based on that data alone, I'm going to hesitate to take a long until either A, this fair value gap is filled, or B, those areas of liquidation have been swept. So it's super common to see that. But all that being said, daily time frame is probably going to reflect some bullish behavior here still. Yes, it does. Obviously, we're tapering off below 70 on the RSI, never truly broke it, but money flow index is generally high. MACD hasn't fully diverged yet, so there's no reason to run for the hills just yet on this coin. I do think being a little bit more patient, not FOMOing into a Friday afternoon trade is probably a better call, though. Those are just my thoughts, of course. But once again, I'm not perfect. Nobody is, right? And that's what makes us perfect, isn't it, though? Our imperfections. Anyways, the comment, that comment doesn't need elaboration. What we want to talk about, though, is that stochastic swing down on the 4-hour time frame. Lost 50 on the RSI. Stochastic and MACD are both diverging. There's really not a lot here telling us that we're in good shape. We've also lost our 20 and 50-day SMA. So while there is potential for us to bounce and pivot off this level, we're right here at our point of control at 238. I think further downside makes a little bit more sense. So if we do see a little bit of a bounce here, it'd probably be a dead cat and the likelihood of the price going a bit lower. So I would be interested roughly, just based on, again, the macro liquidation, the back end data, in a short in the 240 to 245 range with a take profit in the 230 to 225 range. Or just wait it out and consider a long at that lower range. So those are just kind of the ways that I like to trade. Obviously, it's not a one size fits all, but it does require a bit of patience. And at this point, patience runs fairly thin when a lot of people miss opportunities. I totally get it. It's all good though, folks. You will get the next one. It's just the way it goes. There's billions of opportunities at any given time. All right, so that is Solana in a nutshell. Moving on to SUI. What is SUI doing here? Well, this coin is, I wouldn't say disappointing, because it was very, very appointing yesterday, right? If you will. But now at this point, the realism of as setting into all the profits are being taken from that $4 resistance range and essentially coming down to this 360 support range. So as we've discussed previously, 360, 363, that little area is a heavy amount of support. The likelihood of pivoting and bouncing from here is quite high. So that's kind of the bird's eye view there for SUI. But if we look at the back end, let's actually zoom out a little bit and see if there's anything else on the monthly, kind of just emphasize some support ranges for us. So once more, 360, secondary 350. No surprise, round numbers, right? 340 is also that tertiary number there. But the thing you want to recognize is that liquidation delta has shifted bearish. So it's the equivalent of seeing a bearish engulfing candle in a lot of ways, right? Just letting us know that the momentum has shifted and that the direction is down, so you don't just take a long into it, right? The statistical favorability of the price just bouncing from here is lower. It's more likely to continue lower. However, we are getting into an overextended state. A lot of times you will see relief rallies happen. And if so, I'm looking for another dead cat bounce, possibly the 380 range, to consider a short to the 340s, 350s. Now, I only say that because there's a lot of liquidation here between 340 and 350, albeit maybe $500 million, not that much, but still there's a chunk left here of liquidation just below the local low, which is a really common place for liquidation events to occur. Take a look, though, on SUI's daily time frame chart. This is one of those things where yesterday we were looking pretty favorable. We still actually are in a lot of ways too. In other words, we haven't broken bearish by any stretch. So the macro structure is still in good shape. So if you're considering a short on this coin, I would watch it close. Make sure you take caution. But generally speaking, that's not a bad sign here. Everything looks fairly well. Obviously, we're seeing some divergences, but they haven't fully formed yet. We're at a 5 on TT sequential, basically implying we are 20 hours of continuation in the same direction. Oftentimes, those continuation patterns run 36 to 72 hours though. So we're probably in the early stages here, but the key takeaway is most coins look the same here. Lost 50 on the RSI, stochastic swinging down, MACD diverging. These are all emphasizing further consideration for lower price points. So overall, I don't love the SUI chart here. I think 360, even though it's an area of interest, would be a high risk consideration for a long, even though we do have a Fibonacci retracement level there. But I'm sure a lot of Elliott wave theorists are going to tell you it's a good place to get in, when the truth is a lot of back-end data speaks otherwise. Okay, so just be very careful in how you just blindly jump into trades based on key level supports. While they are a very important factor, if there's too many other things emphasizing the direction is still in that same movement there, you maybe want to consider taking a trade in that same direction instead of just magically buying this bottom, what feels like a bottom, and you don't know if it's established yet. Ideally, in a perfect world, we see the price kind of go range bound here for a little while. Then you maybe consider a long if Bitcoin's looking better. Between now and then, not worth a trade right now for SUI. All right, moving on to XRP, let's go ahead and see here. This is a pretty significant pullback here. This bullish type of rectangle pattern did not play out whatsoever. That would have required Bitcoin to maintain its range. And as I've discussed previously, XRP is it's a 1 to 2 ratio with Bitcoin. It moves up with Bitcoin, but it moves down twice as fast. So you got to recognize that the sell-offs are pretty quick on this coin. There's reasons why I like to short XRP. Obviously, we didn't do that yesterday, but the day before we did, caught a tight short before the price took off. All that being said, though, last 7 days doesn't tell us too much. Let's look at the macro. I'm pretty sure the open interest for this coin is still in the range of $2.95 and $3. Let's see. So there's $2.95, yep, and $3 as well. So we're right there in that little support range. So I don't necessarily think you should short the bottom, because obviously $3 is a key level support for XRP. And we look at liquidation delta, it's right here at break even. So the truth is it's shifting momentum, but hasn't fully yet. There is some liquidation as low as 290 to 298. So if we do see that level swept, I'd be interested in maybe considering a long at that point. So hypothetically, Bitcoin keeps pulling back this weekend. XRP goes to the upper 280s, low 290s. That may be a good consideration for a long, because then there's no other liquidation left at this point, and you'd also have bounced off of that local overextension. Because right now we're about 24 hours of overextension. So we haven't stopped pulling back for a full trading day. So oftentimes you will start to see things bottom out in that range. All that being said, daily time frame, just to quickly note here, the important factor here is that we're right here at our point of control at $3. We are above all moving averages, so the macro structure still looks pretty decent. We're testing our support range here, so if we lose that, maybe a different conversation. But for the most part, we got to presume that this $2.95 to $3 range will hold. That's kind of the concept for right now, based on the macro and the 4-hour. Of course, we lost our lower time frame moving averages. We have some confluence at 295 with our moving average and our previous low, and we're also under 50 on the RSI. So these are all signs telling us that further downside should be expected. I'm looking for a consideration on a long, or considering a long right now, looking for 290, 295 is that range. Once that liquidation level has been swept, a good long position seems viable at that point. Between now and then, I'd be very cautious in taking a long just yet. We got to see if Bitcoin's done bottoming out, or if it has bottomed out, if it's done pulling back. All right, those are all my thoughts here. My other thoughts are to be thankful for you. You're awesome. Thank you so much again for being an amazing part of my life. We got a good handful of new subscribers yesterday, and welcome aboard. Make sure you enable alerts and notifications, and always hit that like button whenever you watch my videos. I really appreciate you, though, nonetheless. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. We'll see you tomorrow again. Take care.